Hello, I'd like to welcome you to a discussion of the matrix spike outliers. And what we've got here is basically a set of outliers that are focused in on spiking a sample and then measuring recovery. I will concentrate mainly on the matrix spike group recovery outlier, which is new, but I will cover the others. Here is a picture which shows you the method editor and the setup for the matrix spike group recovery. Let's take a look at the definitions of the matrix outliers in the quantitation data set. I'm looking in the outliers section, and then I'm going to the sample type matrix, and you'll see that there are several that are recorded here. First, matrix group percent recovery. I will show you this in the demo in a moment. There's a simpler metric, just matrix spike, which will determine if the spike is above or below a predefined concentration. There is matrix spike percent recovery, which is the traditional three samples, the blank, the spike, and the dupe, and that will make the calculations of recovery. And then there's matrix spike percent deviation. When you're using the matrix and the matrix dupe, that will compare the percent deviation and give you an idea of that reproducibility if you're using a dupe. Let's take a look at the matrix spike group. The key difference here is that I've associated these samples together, the matrix spike and the sample, by putting a matrix spike group designation. There's group 2 and there's group 1. And if I look at the results here, I can see for N-butylbenzene, the recovery in group 1 turned out to be quite low, a little bit low. And if I look over at the compound here, 1,2-dibromo-3-chloropropane, you'll see that the recovery is a tad high, and that's shown by the outliers here. If I want to compare the sample and the spike sample, let me go back here to the first group, N-butylbenzene. I see the sample, and I see a little bit over here of the compound, and then I can see the spiked, which gives me a much stronger signal. So I can observe what the recoveries are and zero in on cases where they're above or below the limits and inspect what's going on with the sample spike group by setting that up, which I'll show you in a moment. Here I am in the method editor, and I'm going to drop down to the outliers section and look at the matrix spike. So let's go through these very quickly. Here is the simple matrix spike, which just measures against a concentration. Here is the matrix spike group, which I'll show you and what we're using here in the demo, the matrix spike percent limits, and the matrix spike percent difference. So you're putting in the limits of the deviation that's allowed and the percent difference that's allowed to control the outliers in terms of flagging. So let's go to the matrix spike group here, and you can see that I put a limit for the recovery as 80 and 120, and I put the matrix spike concentration for each compound that I want to measure. Note that the compound type is matrix spike so that it participates in this calculation. And that's the mechanism to set up the outlier so that you end up seeing it in batch at a glance. Let me conclude by saying that the matrix spike set of outliers are quite useful if you're doing environmental and you need to measure the recovery as part of your SOP following some, let's say, EPA method. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation.